Hi everyone, all about the gyro here. And I wanted to do in the style of a vlog a question that I have been asked quite a bit this season. Hey gyro, are the iRacing setups any good? In this chart of the Formula IR04 at Brands, I'm going to use as an example to share with you some pieces of wisdom I have learned from my experience both using setup shops and now writing my own to help you determine whether or not you even need a setup shop. And the other bit is how to interpret this in terms of driving style. The TLDR of this is very simple. The iRacing setups, for the most part, in Formula Series, and that is what I'm referring to. So F4, F3, Indy Pro 2000, Formula Renault 2.0, etc. They're decent, and some of them are actually quite good. Here is an example of that. So what I did is I collected some data from 4 setup shops plus the iRacing. I know which setup shop goes to which set of numbers, but you will note that there's no names. And that's because I take intellectual property theft very seriously. So that's why you see setup 1, 2, 3, and 4. They are from actual setups. So let's say you use a setup shop and you go, okay, I want to drive, for this example, the IR04, but what I'm about to tell you applies to any formula car. There are 3 things I want you to pay very close attention to. One is how the spring rates are set up. 2, how the ARBs are set up. And 3, how do the wings and the brake bias work together? So, iRacing, the first 2 numbers you see are in pounds. So convert appropriately to Newton meters. But in the IR04, for example, you have 6 possible things you can do in the front, and you have 6 possible things you can do in the rear as it relates to springs. And spring rates really talk about mechanical grip versus aerodynamic grip. So the first thing you'll notice in this data set is setup 4 is very stiff. They're running maximum stiffness in both of the springs. Here's what that means. That means they have set this car up to be better over high-speed corners, and they're willing to trade mechanical grip for aerodynamic grip. In comparison, if you look at the iRacing setup, it's very soft. So this setup is more mechanically grip oriented versus aero oriented. And since this is an iRacing setup, you want that setup to be as approachable to as many people as possible. So this makes logical sense. In the other 3, you see variations. So setup 3 is 1 step more stiff, so still reasonably soft. But setup 1 and 2, you notice that there is a little bit of a divergence, and that is the numbers are not equal. So the key thing to focus on is there's 4 different types of configurations: soft, 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 hard, hard, soft, hard, hard. The soft, soft, and the hard, hard we've just covered. But the mix of, in this case, hard, soft is a little bit more nuanced. I want to note setup 2. Setup 2, very soft rear, very stiff front. So what this tells me off the hop is the setup maker wants the front end to be as constant as possible, but the rear to be very, very soft. This tells me they're concerned about burning off the rears. The 906, 806 in setup 1, however, is I want it a little bit stiffer because of the bumps. This is Brands Hatch, so there is some bumpiness, but a little bit of softer rear just to help keep the car feeling constant. Now, the second piece of information, the interplay between front and rear ARBs. You have 5 options on both. And the key thing to understand in terms of meta is the front are the big changes. The rear are the little changes. Here, you see 2 very divergent schools of thought. iRacing is a 5.3, setup 2 is a 5.1. That means they want as little oversteer as possible from the front. They have loosened the front up. Meanwhile, setup 3 and 4 is 1.4 and 1.5. They are setting this car up for oversteer, analogous to, let's say, a skip barber car. Setup 1 is a little bit unique. A 3 and 5 is moderate oversteer meets a lot of oversteer. But it's a very stiff car. So what this is telling me is this setup will demand precision and cornering just because of the way both the springs and the ARBs are set up. Do not be surprised if you raced this setup that you're going to spin a lot. There's not a lot of forgiveness in this set. These 2 understandings of springs and ARBs work together to give you general feel. My recommendation is if you are brand new to the car, understand this relationship in the ARBs, and you'll know instantly what the tendency of the car is going to be, understeer versus oversteer. Look at the springs and go, okay, they set this up mechanically versus for fast corners. Leads me to the third point, the wings and the bias. So, looking at my notes here, the front wing has 4 toggles. The rear has 10. And what I've noticed is the difference between 2 and 3 are not subtle. They're significant. The higher the front wing, the more oversteer you're going to have. And it seems like the sweet spot, looking at Winton and looking at brands, 210 seems to be the starting point. And then if you go to 3, there's a reason for it. So tie that into the brake bias, and now we'll start getting the whole picture. Note, one of these brake biases do not belong, and that's setup 2. 54% brake bias. That is for a formula car very intriguing, and that is because often in, let's say, F3, for example, you often start at a low bias and you dial up the bias, as in you move the braking pressure forward to keep the rears under you. So this setup maker, looking at the whole picture now, wants stiff front for bumps, very soft rear, for compliance in mechanical grip in the back. They've gone with 5-1, which means they want the calmest car in terms of oversteer and understeer possible, but they've dialed in a little bit of wing to help rotation, and they've set the bias very, very low, once again, to keep the rears under them. The rest of these brake biases are pretty much one and the same. They're very, very close together. But understanding how wing and bias work together gives you an insight. And in this case, with setup 2, a 310 with a low brake bias tells me quick turn in, slingshot out because of the soft rear springs. So, to answer the question, are iRacing setups any good? They are. Here's a comparison chart of, like I said, 4 popular setup shops. And you see, iRacing is doing just fine. And in general experience this season, most of their setups, regardless of series, have been pretty good. That's it, my friends, for now. Take care of yourselves. Take care of one another. God bless.